Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soccer Queens podcast, where we discuss everything female athlete training. I have Emily Neff, who is a performance coach to female athletes, back on the show. I believe it's the third or fourth time. I've lost track. It's going to be many more times, so we're not even going to worry about it. But today's topic is near and dear to my heart and also Emily's heart because we've seen a lot of female athletes that we've worked with over the years and the discussions we've had with potential clients and parents about this issue of overtraining and overscheduling our girls year round with organized sport. So, we're going to get into what's going on with this. What are some of the consequences, especially for the growing female athlete and all the changes that are happening in her body? And I'm going to kick off this episode with a story from a few weeks ago. And I got on the phone with a potential athlete parent, and she was telling me how she really wants her middle school girl to strength train because she wants to keep her healthy and also improve her performance. And she's just worried about her getting injured or having overuse. And I thought that was great, and I was so excited to get her on our schedule. But then the mom said, "No, we're going to hold off for a couple of months, and here's why. She has middle school soccer practice. She has club soccer practice. She's jumping from one practice to the other, sometimes on the same night. And then on the weekend, she has games and she doesn't have a day off. So we don't know when we're going to fit strength training in." Huge red flag. And I have this conversation with a lot of people, and I think parents are well intentioned and they see their daughter loves playing, and we'll get into that discussion later, but they just kind of feel shackled by the year-round sports grind, and they do want their daughters to strength train, but it's usually the first thing that gets X out of the schedule because of practices and games. So that's my story. And I told the mom that her daughter, who is about to go through puberty, is playing more games and putting in more hours than a professional athlete who is grown and matured in her body. And I went into explaining why that is dangerous and what her daughter should be focusing on. And I just said my piece, and I just pray that people come around and see the consequences of this. So, Emily, what are your thoughts on all this? And have you experienced similar conversations? And what are some of the consequences?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought up that story because I think that is the conversation that we have here at Relentless at least once a week with a parent, getting them to understand that just because your club or your school is saying that your athlete has to do this, as a parent, your job is to teach your kid how to prioritize what matters most. And that's first her health and longevity. And something that you and I have discussed before, it's what's the point? What's the point in doing all of this training if you're not giving your body adequate time to recover and adapt? There is a study that I was telling you about previously. It was published in 2011. Which was over a decade ago, but demands more conversation because it's such an important concept that explains, what is overscheduling and overuse at the physiological level. So it's called Sports Related Injuries in Youth Athletes is Overscheduling a Risk Factor. And they define overscheduling as having events that are either skill based, competitive based, or practice scrimmage based that are at a moderate to high volume and intensity over any 48-hour period, meaning they're back to back. And when I remember I first read this and I thought, well, this is the definition of every single one of our youth athletes' schedules. And what the researchers found is that any overscheduling injury can be defined as an injury that's related to excessive planned physical activity without adequate time for rest and activity. So that means that we're exposing the body to a lot of stress. And stress is something that is physiological, meaning it is um, exposing the body to load that creates breakdown. And that's really important. We need our bodies to break down because that's how they're taught it needs to build up and be better. But the issue comes around is if we continuously give our athletes stress, we have all of these micro injuries that are occurring. And without enough time for recovery in between those bouts of stress, those micro injuries are never able to actually heal and improve. Now, with that said, the important caveat of strength training is that when programmed correctly, strength training is directed, meaning each time stress is applied to the body, it's done in a progressively overloaded manner. So the body knows not only does it has to recover, but it has to be ready for something even bigger to come. So we're getting better. That means your athlete is building a resilience. But when we think of sport, sport is not progressively overloaded. Sport is just, we're going to do pitching, we're going to do hitting, we're going to have a practice, and then we're going to have another practice, and then you're going to go back to hitting and back to pitching. And we're doing the same repetitive motions over and over again. So we have breakdown, hopefully we have recovery, and then athletes returning to baseline. But she's not super compensating. She's not adapting. She's not getting stronger. So without this adequate stress that's going to be overloaded to tell the body to get better, your athlete is going to be in an enhanced, greater chance of injury because we're not giving her body the chance to overcome what we're exposing her to. So that's why it's super imperative to understand one, what is your athlete's main goal? Is it to play in college one day? Is it to make the high school team? Now, what are we doing to help her reach that goal while also making sure that she stays off the sideline? Because if she's on the sideline because she's injured, it doesn't matter if she made the team or not. Kid is not playing. And that's where health and longevity come in. That's when making sure we're preparing the body physically as well as mentally, and recovering through sleep and nutrition. And those are the main pillars that we have to establish. And then from there, that's when we like to sprinkle on top the additional skill work, the additional practice. But it's like the equivalent that I feel like these athletes are in right now is like, it's to say that as a professional athlete, you don't have to practice. You just have to keep playing, keep competing every single day and not actually put in the baseline work to help make you better. And at this age, if we're not putting the baseline level of physical preparedness in, you're setting your athlete up for an injury. It's just science. There's nothing that we can deny here. The body is breaking down, and without enough prep, without enough recovery time, and without a different type of stressor, such as resistance training, the body never knows it needs to get better and needs to improve its strength tolerance to handle these high loads that are continue to occur. And instead, your athlete is just running around in circles and she's never going to get better. And instead, she's just getting extremely tired and fatigued.
I think a lot of people might have the question, well, how do I know I'm in a schedule that is overtraining me? Is it 2 games a week with 3 practices? Is it 2 practices with 1 game on the weekend? Like, what is a red flag? And just kind of like a sample schedule we can look at.
I love that because one, this what we're going to give as a recommendation is for the average because from a scientific standpoint, there's something called like the minimum effective dose and the maximum effective dose. So the minimum effective dose is the minimum amount of sport that we need to actually do to enhance our skill set. And that maximum effective dose is going to be the most amount of sport that we can do right before that immediate breakdown is going to occur. And we want our athletes to be hanging out right in the middle of it. And every athlete's range is going to differ. Does she strength train? Is she stronger? Cool. She has a greater threshold. Did she just go through puberty? Has she never strength trained before? Does she have a previous injury? That window is much smaller. And this is where our recommendations have to be taken as an average and then applied to understanding these different characteristics that will affect your athlete's ability to recover. So, ideally, what we want to see is eliminating back to back practices within the same day. if we are practicing the same sport for more than 2 hours back to back, your athlete is undoubtedly too fatigued to actually experience any type of motor skill acquisition. And that's what the skill training sessions are about. If she's too fatigued, you're just throwing your money down the drain because nothing is actually setting in. That's what motor skill acquisition is. If you're too fatigued, you can't learn a new movement. You can't learn a new skill set. It's not going to be enhanced anywhere because she's too fatigued. So we want to limit that back to back scheduling. And that's, I've seen this way too often, having a softball athlete having school practice,
Mhm.
having maybe an hour break, and then doing another 2 hours of club practice. And it's like, well, what's the point? What's the point? She is so fatigued by that second point, by that second practice. And if the coach is threatening her ability to play on a team, well, what a great opportunity to one, teach your athlete how to have a conversation with an adult, with a superior, because this is something they will have to do for the rest of their life. Maybe the coach is not aware that this athlete is coming from literally the same sport practice. Maybe there's a way that they can discuss, well, is that school actually not even allowed to practice? And this is something that's highly recommended, but not mandatory because in where we're at PIAA, you're not allowed to do anything until the start of season. And unfortunately, we see that all too often. So let's have a conversation. Hey, coach, we're not in season right now, and I really want to be there for the team. What are your thoughts if I went to school practice one day and club practice the other day? That way, I can make sure I have enough time to get a different type of stressor in, such as strength training, which is a very different skill set than the sport that I'm doing. And if I do that, I know by the time of when the sports season is going to hit, I'm going to be able to give it my all because one, I'm not burnt out. Two, I have a much lower chance of injury. And three, I've put in the extra side work that I need to be stronger, more powerful, more agile, and more resilient to injuries. But without having that conversation, how are we going to actually accomplish anything? And the second half is let's say your coach says no. Well, is that the type of coach that you want for your daughter? Is that the type of leadership that you want? You want someone that says, "Well, you have to break your body down for me because that is what you need to do for the team." I don't know about you, but as an adult, if a boss said that to your employee, I don't think that employee is going to stick around too much longer. And they really shouldn't because that boss doesn't care about the employee. We want to start using sport to teach these skill sets now. So, having that conversation is paramount and teaching your athlete what is a good leader and what is a not good leader is such an important lesson to learn at this age. But by just doing whatever the coach says and not having these conversations, we're losing so many opportunities to one, protect our athletes from injuries, and two, teaching them how to communicate, which is an important skill set outside of school because they need to understand how to do this for the rest of their life.
That's such a good point, and I think it does come down to people just afraid to speak up, whether it's the parent or the player out of fear that the coach might bench them or they're gonna get less playing time, whatever it is, but it's just something that people need to stand up for
Mhm,
because in the end, it's not worth getting overuse injuries, and it may seem like everything's going great and you can jump from one practice to the other and play all these games, but with overuse injuries, you don't really know they're happening until it's too late.
mhm,
Especially with stress fractures, those gradually come on and then all of a sudden the pain gets sharper and you're like, "Well, when did this happen?"
mhm,
Well, it was that accumulation over several weeks, several months of doing the same sport over and over again and being on multiple teams in a season, whether you're playing the same sport multiple teams in a season or different sports multiple teams in a season. It's just too much for the body to handle. And to Emily's point, if you're doing more than 2 hours a night of sport specific practice, it's going to reach diminishing returns eventually. So I'm so glad we're having this discussion. But with the athletes who do strength train and who do their preparation, they have a fighting chance against this load. And I really want to put this into perspective for everyone. So let me just share this real quick. So this is just a week of workload from a high school athlete, 16-year-old girl, and she's a soccer player. And you'll see that she had a couple games this week and then training sessions on the other days. So jammed into just 5 days is well over 20 miles of running. And this isn't just jogging, it's decelerations, it's jumping, it's sprinting. And you'll see, so the trimp score here under workload, when this gets above 20 trimps, that means it's a very high workload. Once we're in the single digits, that's more of a quick speed session or a light to moderate recovery session. That's less workload. But for an athlete like this, running over 20 miles a week for a couple months, maybe more, that's a lot. But I will say with this specific athlete, she has done her strength training. She is prepared for this workload, but realistically, not a lot of girls are prepared to handle over 20 miles of moderate to intense running.
Mhm.
So it's really important that that tissue durability, that muscular strength matches the sport specific load that's being placed on the body. If that sport load is higher than your muscular strength, then that's not a good ratio. And that's when injury starts to happen. So it's really interesting looking at how much mileage is being covered and then the context within that and the high intensity runs that are also occurring and just really taxing on the joints. So
Mhm.
Emily, anything you want to add there?
That's great because it reminds me of a conversation I was just having this morning with one of our parents of an athlete who she's a soccer goalie. She is 13 years old, just went through puberty. I've known her pre-puberty. I know she's gone through puberty because I've seen this kid grow a million inches. And about 4 months ago, she injured her elbow. It seemed to be a OCD, so it seemed to be a type of oh my god, cartilage injury. So having a conversation with the parent, I'm looking at this athlete's training load, and we have about 5 to 10 hours a week on average every single week, every single season long. It seems to be that that average is actually increasing to about 10 to 15 because we only have time for strength training on average maybe one time a week. So she has spent, when I look at her amount of attendances, she has spent more than 6 months out of the year training only one time a week. Well, the parent was concerned that maybe doing cleans is what's causing, the elbow injury. And I had a conversation of, well, let's think like she's here about one time a week. The cleans, it seems from an outsider, it's an elbow movement, it's actually a lat movement. But even with that, if we think of exposure time, if we think she's doing on average about 15 reps of a clean, only 3 of those reps are a little bit heavier than the week before. She's doing that once a week, multiply that by her weight, and that's the load imposed. Now compare that to the amount of goalie saves that she has done and the velocity of that ball that is coming at her elbow, as well as don't even forget the amount of load that will be exposed on that elbow if she slides to save and she lands on the side of her arm. Just from an exposure time standpoint, the probability of her getting injured from a clean is far less when compared to the probability of her getting injured from repeated contact times of saving a ball without enough strength in the musculature. And try to explain that, our cartilage is just like a little cushion between our joints. So without enough muscular strength and coordination, as well as bone density, that force, every time she saves it, has to go somewhere. And it's going to go to the cartilage. And the cartilage is going to, over time, have those micro injuries that then turns into a big inflammation. And she needed a cast and she was out for about 4 months. I understood from an outside perspective why we might be hesitant towards doing a clean. And instead, I recommended she needs to start coming in at least 2 to 3 times a week during this winter season, because this indicates that her body is nowhere near as strong as it needs to be to handle as much exposure that she's experiencing on the field. And if we just think in terms of those simple probability, in terms of, what's my contact time? What's my exposure of one thing compared to the next? Of course, it seems pretty logical that if you're doing way more sport than preparation, the way more sport is going to be the cause of the injury and not the movements that we're doing in preparation, especially because we know strength training is really the only modality that can reduce the chance of injury by 50%, up to 70% in adolescent female athletes. But that's only if we're doing at least 2 times a week of training for at least 12-week periods at a time. And we don't want more than 6 months of the year doing 1 time a week. Because if we're doing any more than 6 months of just 1 time a week, that's not enough physical stress for the body to improve. We're doing a great job maintaining, but this maintenance, this level of strength that she's at right now is very clearly not enough to prevent this type of injury from happening again. So I think it just has to come down to, let's just think about this. Like, let's just logically think about this. You don't have to understand the numbers, you don't have to do the math, but just think, why are these injuries occurring? Well, we have no buffer. We need more buffer. We need more things that are going to buffer the impact, whether that's you're running and it's on your knees and on your ankles, or you're a goalie and you're saving a ball, or you're a softball athlete and you're hitting a ball or throwing a ball or catching a ball. That is so much impact and so much exposure time. We need more buffer. We need more buffer. And the cool thing about this buffer is this buffer also makes us better at what we're doing. It makes us more powerful. It's like a double-edged sword. And I think that if we have to do a better job at understanding why it's so imperative to prioritize it within a schedule versus thinking, does my athlete need another 2 hours of the movement pattern that she's already done for at least 10 hours this week?
Mhm.
What's the point? What's the point? Will this actually make her better? Well, we learned that like whatever that 1 hour, the certain amount of hours you have to do to develop a skill, we that myth has been busted. That's not true. That's not actually how it works. That's not how motor skill acquisition works. So we have to think of the body as a physiological being, and that too much stress leads to breakdown without enough time for preparation and recovery, especially when your athlete is growing and going through puberty, because that time of growth is super stressful. It's super stressful at the physiological level, not just from the athlete, like, oh, I have growing pains. Like, yes, of course, that's super stressful. But at a physiological standpoint, that is a lot of stress that her body needs. That's why kids need to sleep more. That's why kids can eat astronomical amount of calories, because their bodies are so stressed. So they need more recovery. And that's something that we have to understand when it comes to youth sports.
The amount of sport-specific training that's happening it's disastrous in my opinion, and you
Absolutely.
mentioned this girl, and this is a very common thing amongst performance coaches, is athletes coming in just 1 hour a week with you.
Mm.
When
Yep.
we logically think about it, like you said, like, does that make sense? Like, does 1 hour of preparation for these 10 to 15 hours of sport and high velocity movements, does that make any sense to
Mhm.
keep athletes healthy? And especially with girls going through puberty, like you said, there's so much going on physiologically that all the more reason to strength train.
Mhm.
And the girls who struggle the most and the population where I see the most injuries is girls going through puberty, playing multiple teams in a season who have never done any strength training.
Mhm.
And it's the same nagging injuries over and over again. And it just becomes this endless cycle of them just plowing through and thinking that their bodies are invincible and not doing anything about it and not having that balance of strength training to sports training. And on top of that, most of them are under fueling.
Mhm.
And that doesn't help either. And if athletes aren't fueling enough, getting the vitamins and minerals they need for bone growth, for body function, it's going to be a disaster, and it's actually going to end up negating some of the benefits of strength training because they're not getting what they need to really build their muscles, to build strong bones and joints. And you might find girls going through puberty getting stress fractures because of a vitamin D or calcium or magnesium deficiency, which is very common, or girls having chronic muscle soreness or Osgood-Schlatter because they're not getting enough protein. It's just it's just such an endless cycle of it. I can't even explain how bad it is, but it's just people need to really do something about this, and
Mhm.
it's tough. I You said you have these conversations every week with parents. Now, are people convinced, or are they just like, "Oh, whatever, Emily, like, we're still gonna play on 2 teams. We'll see you when we're more free and when our schedule opens up, maybe we'll make it in for an hour." Like, do
Mhm.
they, like, buy into any of this? Like, do they
No,
believe you?
it really depends. We have some that totally do, like, some of our best athletes that have been with us for literally 5 years or have been training consistently 3 times a week year round. Those are the kids that are, like, my superstars. Those are the kids that the parents have bought in. At first, maybe there was some wavering in the beginning, sports here, I don't wanna I don't there's a misconception of I don't want to strength train during season because it's doing too much. And then having that conversation of no, 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 this is actually going to help buffer all of that other stuff that she's doing out there. We need to make sure her complementary muscles are being worked because if we're only working one specific movement pattern over and over again, too much stress, not a lot of buffer. So getting that buy-in totally happens. And then, I mean, it's funny, we're getting into our winter over here. So now it's like all of those people, I was laughing with my office manager, is like all those parents that we've sent these emails trying to explain, like, please come in at least one time, like, don't stop coming. They don't respond. And I'm like, oh, it's just so funny. All of a sudden they're responding again, right? When it's time for us to do it. And like, hey, listen, I love it. I want these girls to come in because even 3 months of strength training is better than nothing, but I just wish that we had a better understanding that you can't do something for a little bit of time and expect long-term results. That's not how this works. That's not how anything in life works. You can't ride a bike 3 months out of the year and expect to be a freaking pro and go race BMX. Like, you can't do that. You have to invest in something in the long term, which is again why I fell in love with strength and conditioning because I thought, wow, what a great parallel to life that I felt that I wish I had exposure to as a kid because strength and conditioning taught me you have to be consistent. You have to continuously do it. You have to be responsible and figure out a way because when you do, you have these long-term benefits. But if you don't, you're running around in circles, not running in a straight line towards a goal. Um, and I think with that, something that I wanted to bring up that have found over the years is like a misconception of what it means to be a multi-sport athlete. And I have now learned that a lot of parents maybe think that multi-sport athlete means like playing lots of different sports, which is totally true. But it doesn't mean that we're playing them all at the same time. I have multiple kids that are playing basketball, soccer, and lacrosse at the same time where I'm like, all of those movements are very similar. It's a lot of running, cutting, jumping. That's kind of the same thing over and over again. Yes, it's great that we're learning different skill sets, but if you didn't actually take a break from one, you're just adding to that over scheduling. Versus when we talk about multiple sport and research and how they can help reduce the chance of injury, it's because we're really just managing training loads because you went from playing soccer all the time to now playing basketball and no more soccer and then maybe going to softball because you're still figuring it out. I think rule of thumb is I always like to tell parents, listen, have your athlete start to fall in love with a sport. She's going to play school, she's going to have a club because here you got to play club to get committed somewhere. Then let her have one more sport that she does for fun. But that fun sport has to be done when she's not doing her other sports. And then I need one season that's an off season. So you're allowed to have 2 seasons, hardcore, play your sport, love your sport. When you're in, let's say you're a softball player, so you're playing softball, you're doing your fall ball, and you're doing fall ball with club, you're doing summer with club. Spring we know is school season. Okay. Do nothing in winter. Do nothing in winter. Nothing. Winter should be time for preparation, for fun. And then you're like, well, I want to play another sport. Okay, well, let's look. Fall ball is really not as time, it's not as time consuming. It's really only about 5 to 10 hours a week. Perfect. You want to go play soccer, but you're only allowed to have fun. And the moment that you start feeling stressed and the coach tells you have to do all of this extra stuff, we don't. We say no because that's not your main sport. That's your fun sport. And that's for school. And that's where you still have to make training in twice a week during that so that at least we have 2 seasons that I see you at least 2 times a week. That's what I need. And that's what it means to be a multi-sport athlete that's prioritizing her health and longevity. And then when in season comes, you taper down some weeks to 1 time a week because you're nearing playoffs or nearing a big showcase. But the other weeks in that spring and summer, when it's really important as a softball player, that's when you are making sure that you're recovering, you're sleeping, your elbow starts to hurt. You tell your trainer, you tell your strength coach. We talk about this because this is a signal that, hey, something's not going right and we can help. But if you just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, well, hey, my school softball coach said that I have to go to practice at least twice a week during the winter. I think it's time to have a conversation with him because one, that's against PIAA rules. Two, what if you go once a week, but that means that you stop doing extra hitting lessons because that practice is just hitting. I don't think you need extra hitting lessons, but maybe you do. And you tell your coach, hey, coach, I'm only going to be able to make this once every other week. Oh, that coach tells you that you can't play. Parents, it's time for us all to start communicating with one another because is that the coach we want for our athletes? I certainly don't. I certainly don't want that person to teach my kids. I want to have someone that is a good leader and also remembers that school sport should be fun first and emphasize health because they're still youth. And then we're pushing, of course, we want these kids to excel. But if we're only worried about excelling and not preparation and health, what's the point?
Mhm.
What's the point?
One rebuttal I usually get is it's because she loves it, and we just want her to do all the sports, be on all the teams in a season because she just loves the sport so much. And I get that. You see your daughter having fun. She's enjoying herself. She's in different environments on her school team and her club team. But there comes a time when eventually you do get the diminishing returns, and then that risk of overuse does increase. And I do find it interesting that parents use the because she loves it argument to just justify this and justify overscheduling and overtraining. And honestly, who cares if you love it? You can burn out from something you love.
Mhm,
Ask anyone, ask any professional athlete, or even if we're not talking sports, your career, you can burn out from something you enjoy that you do over and over and over again year round. So
mhm,
there comes a time when you do have to take a step back, recover, rest, do something else, get a different stimulus, do your preparation, get into a new environment, and just get off this hamster wheel that just doesn't end.
mhm,
And I think people need to stop using that argument because they love it, because then that means they're putting their identity in just their sport. And I had Sarah Murray, who was a sports psychologist in the EPL, and she said it's very dangerous for young athletes to put their identity in just their sport because eventually that sport will end. You
mhm,
might not play in college, but
mhm,
if you do play in college, you might not play pro, and it's going to end at some point in your early 20s or in your late 20s.
mhm,
And you have to have something else going for you than just your sport. You
mhm,
have to have other interests and just be a multifaceted human being. And
mhm,
that's when professional athletes who make it to the highest level, they eventually retire, and that's why a lot of them you hear stories of depression and identity crisis and just completely like going off the rails because their sport was their main thing. And look, that's probably why they might have gotten to a high level, but Sarah Murray said that your talent is a blessing and a curse. So you have to be aware of that. And I think it's important to look at yes, the physical side of things, the injury side of things, but also just the mental side of all of this and just putting all of your eggs in one basket and letting your sport define who you are and define your value, especially when you're so young and
Mhm.
just putting so much more pressure on yourself.
Absolutely. I love that. That's such an important statement because even for parents, like I feel like I would combat with the analogy of like, well, do you love like let's say, do you love the weekends when you're not at work? That doesn't mean you just like don't work all week. It means you got to do the stuff that you got to do to enjoy that time. You have to go to work during the week. You have to do these things. And that allows you to love and appreciate the time you get to do the things that you love so much. So I love that your daughter loves playing her sport. Let's keep that love alive by teaching her how to separate certain parts of her life. And there's different things that she can love. And it's so important for her to do it, especially during this time right now where we do have so much more mental health awareness and we need more because these kids are just pigeonhole themselves in this identity and they're looking online and someone has a different video of them playing their sport every 12 seconds that they're posting and it looks like this kid never stops. So it's like, guess what? This kid is stopping. This is social media. Get off social media. This is not their real world. And even to create an analogy with myself, man, I know that burnout. This is my 7th year of business. And I went through a phase where I was working, I'm not kidding, 80 hours a week every single week. And when I look back and I think, do I think that was needed to get where I am today? No, I think I could have taken a day off. I think if I did take a day off during that time, it would have allowed me to understand who I was outside of Relentless versus taking me to my 30s to realize, oh, I'm a person. I have other things in life to give besides being the owner of Relentless. I have so many other things. I am so many other things. But I didn't do that. And I wish that I had. So I like to use that as an example to help teach my kids and teach my parents that, hey, it's good to love something, it's good to have a passion for something, but if we don't also learn how the discipline of balance and the discipline of pulling away from that love, we're going to lead to something that's really disastrous in the long term. And we don't want that because then you don't love anything. It's a discipline to say, hey, I am not checking my email today. Hey, I know my employees message me, but I'm in the weekend and these are my days off. And these are my boundaries because they'd be really mad if I was messaging them on their day off. So I'm going to also not respond and wait until the first of my work week. And that's an important boundary to establish. And it's hard because I want to help everyone. I'm like, oh, you have a question, let me help. But it's a boundary that I had to learn to establish because if I didn't, I don't think we'd be here. I think I would have sold this place because I'm like, it's killing me. I barely sleep. And that's not what we want. That's not how we succeed in life. We have to learn that discipline of taking a step back. And we learn that from an early age. But if we teach these kids at that early age, give it all of the time. You have the energy. Then you have burnout by the time you're in your mid 20s. Then what's the point? What's the point of that? There is none. Teach them the skills now so that when they get older, they don't need mom and dad to teach them these skill sets. And when they're in their 30s, you want them to be grown adults at that point. And that comes with the lessons that we can take from these sports and from these overscheduling issues.
I'm so glad you shared your story with just owning your facility, and it's so true. It's honestly only a matter of time before you burn out when you're doing something over and over again, putting in so many hours each week and just not setting those boundaries. And it happens in youth sports, it happens in business and career. And what a great lesson for our youth athletes to set boundaries, to take rest and to just not put their all into one thing all of the time. And I think it's important to share that. And I wanted to read my Instagram post from the other week, and I for some reason a lot of people like this. I thought it would be a little bit controversial, but as women, we're just encouraged to go for the degrees and these like high level positions. And I think that's great, but it's also an identity issue because we're just putting our value in these superficial things and these titles. So here was my post. For many years, I wanted to be a boss babe. I hustled, I proved myself, I chased titles, certifications, and degrees. I burned myself out, I became sick. Now, I still work hard, but I don't place my identity in these titles. Female empowerment is way more. I am at peace.
Mhm.
And honestly, it took me until my 30s to reach a state of equilibrium where I was just like, you know what? I don't have to do this grind all the time. I don't have to run myself into the ground. And to your point, Emily, I don't have to constantly be available for everyone 24/7. That's just poor boundaries and just poor taking care of yourself. And there comes a time when you have to draw a line in the sand. And, I had to learn the hard way of spending time in the ER from anxiety and panic attacks multiple times in my 20s, early in my business. And I learned my lesson. And, you don't want to learn the hard way. And that's a message for everyone listening. You don't want to learn when it's too late, when your daughter gets a stress fracture or when she gets an ACL injury, because yes, those are also overuse. You don't want to learn that way. And yes, it may seem fine now. She's hustling, she's on her grind, but take some time. Take
Yeah.
some time and really think about this and think about what the long term goal is with her sport and what type of woman does she want to be and what other interests does she have. So I hope that inspires people.
I love that. I'm glad you shared that.
It's yeah, you go through tough times and you learn, but you come out on the other end and you that's why we're so passionate about preaching this and just really hoping it sticks with our young female athletes. And I'll end with this one thing, and Emily, I want to hear your thoughts on what I'm about to read here, but Don Williams is one of my colleagues. He does a lot of work in the college recruiting space, and he's done it for well over a decade. So he knows what young athletes go on to play in college and what it takes and what the pathway is to get there. And I think a lot of people don't truly know. So this is interesting. He says you've got $100,000 to $250,000 for your kid's youth soccer. And your kid is top 2% in the nation for girls and top 1% for boys. And your kid loves a life on the road. And the goal is Power Five. ECNL or GA and MLS next are the places to be. The skids are greased, but there's still zero guarantee, and most won't make it with this schedule.
Mhm.
Most kids won't get to those Power Five schools no matter what they do or how much money their parents spend or what league they play in. Most, if they want to continue to play, will end up playing at a college they could have gone to even if they didn't do all these things.
Mhm. I love that. I think you posted that and I was like, "Yes."
Mhm.
That's something that I feel every parent needs to stop and consider. Like, one, if the goal is a scholarship, how much money are you investing into this scholarship in terms of skill training, extra clubs, extra all the extra things that you have to do. You're traveling. Oh my goodness, the cost of flights. I couldn't even imagine being a parent this year and having to travel and take all of these planes. I'm like, "Oh my god, they could pay for college if they just stopped doing that and just saved it." Like that would be a better investment. Put your money in like a CD and then you'll earn money and you can pay for college. So that's one. Two, I think one of my favorite books because I was in college when this happened, and I think this is so important for every parent that has an aspiring high level athlete, is to read Why Did Maddie Run? And it is a book about this athlete who is a track and field runner in UPenn, right by I went to Drexel, it was right by me, and she took her life. And she was someone that you would never have expected that. And she was ever since high school, she was such a high achiever and such a great athlete. But reading the stories and it went through like her text messages and talking through other people that she spoke to, it just helps open your eyes the amount of stress that sometimes we inadvertently put on these kids and why it's so imperative to realize it because a scholarship is great. But if it means, you know, it's pulling from your athlete's actual mental health, what's the point? Is it worth it? Because we are so much more than an athlete. We are so much more than the sport that we play. And it's important for our kids to know that, to understand they are valued far beyond their success in their sport. And I just think it's such an important book for any parent that has an athlete that says, "Hey, I want to go play in college one day." Read the book, and just it just helps provide you a better perspective of how to guide her along that process.
What's the name of the book again?
See Maddie run.
Okay, I will put that in the caption, you guys. I've never read it, I've heard
Oh,
of
it's
it,
so
but it
good.
sounds very powerful and something for everyone to consider. This episode is actually out during the holidays, so will be a great holiday gift.
Mhm,
Emily, I think that was a strong note to end on, and this discussion will make a lot of people think,
mhm,
maybe rethink some of their actions and maybe what they're working towards, and maybe have a conversation with their child
mhm,
because oftentimes a lot of this is pushed on the kid from the adult, and the college dream is not the kids but it's the adults,
mhm,
and doing all of the travel is what the parent wants to do and maybe the kid doesn't want to do that. So also have a transparent discussion and talk about, okay, well, what do you want out of this?
mhm,
What does your kid want to get out of sport? And
mhm,
where do they want to go with it? But also, what are they going to do when it does come to an end?
mhm,
Because it will. And the more we can prepare for that time and just openly discuss it, the easier that transition will be. And
mhm.
Sarah Murray's episode talks about this, and I'll link that in the caption below as well. Please also check out Emily's Twitter and Instagram as well as website in the caption below. And Emily, thank you again for this amazing discussion.
Thank you so much. I love being here.
Awesome. See you guys next episode.